are three things that keep a railway moving: people, information, and fuel. At CN, we get world-class performance in all of these areas. Traffic volumes are up from previous years. We move more freight than ever before. As a result, operating expenses have risen, with fuel leading the way. Prior to the energy crisis, fuel costs were about half the total amount of wages for all running crews. In 1984, fuel was twice the cost of wages. To counter this trend, CN embarked on an extremely successful fuel conservation program. In 1977, our gross ton miles per gallon figure was 630. In 1984, that same figure was 756, a significant improvement. Today, we do even better. Had we continued at the old rate, by 1984, we would have used 46.1 million gallons more fuel than we actually did. Fuel conservation has already saved CN over $56.7 million. This saving is due to the efforts of CN people right across the system. Today, fuel conservation is everybody's business, and the exchange of information plays a big role. Conservation starts here in power control, as engines are assigned for freight service. Each train is given the units needed to operate efficiently. Trains can't be over or underpowered, so the proper balance is struck. Physical characteristics of the regions are taken into consideration. Planning and communication keeps the system operating smoothly. Fuel conservation efforts are also found at the terminal level. When engines are transferred between terminals, for example, they're isolated or shut down, conserving fuel. They're also shut down when on layover. Fuel previously wasted by idling is saved. And as engines are prepared for the road, the elimination of spillage during fueling also helps conserve fuel. But when you get right down to it, the locomotive engineer still has the greatest effect on fuel consumption. On an average train run, by practicing some basic techniques, an engineer can save the equivalent of his or her own wages in fuel. Conservation efforts by engineers have already been extremely successful, but there's always room for improvement. Fuel conservation can begin before the train even leaves the yard. When pumping air, for example, generally speaking, the main air reservoir is charged by advancing the throttle. However, there's a point at which this technique wastes fuel without increasing the charging rate. The throttle should be advanced far enough to keep the main reservoir pressure 15 psi higher than the feed or regulating valve setting. In any case, it shouldn't be advanced higher than the 5th notch. As soon as the main reservoir pressure exceeds the feed or regulating valve setting by more than 15 psi, the throttle should be returned to idle. Use the airflow indicator on the locomotive and brake pipe pressure readings from the tail end to determine when charging is complete. That way, fuel won't be wasted by useless charging. Whenever possible, the train should be charged from yard air sources first. Less fuel will be used to pump air. In another area, the use of sand can affect fuel consumption. Sand adds that little bit of tractive adhesion you sometimes need to get rolling. However, too much sand wastes fuel. Sand significantly increases train resistance. An engine has to use more power and fuel to get moving. Use sand sparingly and only when necessary. Out on the road, other fuel conservation techniques should be used. As far as train movement goes, faster is not necessarily better. Fuel consumption is directly related to train speed. As train speed increases, aerodynamic drag increases. An engine has to work harder to punch through the air at higher speeds. That requires more power and more fuel. The advantage of higher speed is often outweighed by the cost of fuel consumption. Increased train speed is also very costly in another way. An engine uses more fuel accelerating than it does running at a constant speed. Even a small increase can be expensive. Speed should be increased only when it can be maintained for a reasonable distance. Use the lowest possible horsepower of tractive effort to maintain a speed consistent with your train's required performance level. Here, the train dispatcher can help. Remember, there's a fuel penalty whenever a train slows or stops unnecessarily. Getting back up to track speed burns extra fuel. As much as possible, keep trains moving at a constant speed. Set signals up well in advance of approaching trains. This will help. When something interrupts traffic, notify the affected trains immediately. That way, engineers can reduce speed and avoid making a complete stop. Dispatchers should try and keep trains moving even during meets. Take track geography, train length, and tonnage into consideration when setting meets. A few words of communication with the engineers will give them a chance to pace their trains and adjust their speed accordingly. Other situations that demand communication are track work projects. Here, the dispatcher has to cooperate with the engineering department. The dispatcher monitors and controls the length of work blocks, giving the engineering department enough time to do their work. But he still has to move trains. There's no point in moving trains too quickly or too soon if they end up stopping, waiting for work blocks to end. To avoid this and the fuel penalties that go with it, pace traffic very carefully around work projects. Again, communication is the key. Where temporary slow orders are concerned, dispatchers should take time to gather the latest information from the engineering department. As soon as the track is safe, slow orders should be removed so trains can resume track speed. Remember, the dispatcher and the engineer are partners in fuel conservation efforts. Maintaining a constant speed is important, but controlling that speed is just as important. Here, too, fuel can be saved. There are three commonly used techniques in train speed control: power braking, modified train control, and dynamic braking. Power braking, applying train brakes while maintaining engine power, may be an effective way to control speed, but it's extremely inefficient in terms of its cost. Excessive fuel is used as the engine strains to overcome increased train resistance. Wheel and brake shoe wear builds up. In-train forces are amplified. Overall, it's a very expensive technique. In modified train control, the throttle position is varied in conjunction with the rolling resistance of the train. Instead of using brakes to match train resistance, the engineer reduces throttle and lets the train brake itself using natural track gradient and curvature. This is a fuel-efficient method of speed control. It also means that an engineer must really know his territory. The third technique for speed control uses dynamic brakes. This feature is already found on many locomotives and will become more common as new units are purchased. In dynamic braking, power generated by the traction motors, reconnected as generators, creates a retarding force that can be used for controlling speed and making slowdowns. It's effective and efficient. In order to see how these three techniques affect fuel consumption, let's go to Gimli, Manitoba, and the locomotive simulator. Here we'll demonstrate the techniques in a simulated train run. The run will be 9 miles long over the Halton sub, and train speed will be controlled through 3 slow orders. The train will have 4 GF30 units, 60 loads, and 1 empty. Trailing tonnage will be 6630, and total length will be 3,786 feet. On the first run, the engineer will use power braking. As he moves through the slow orders to control speed, he applies train brakes while maintaining engine power. Look at what's happening. At mileage 4.2, for example, a 30-mile-per-hour slow on a 0.7 descending grade, the engineer makes a brake pipe reduction of 20 pounds, while maintaining a throttle position of 8. Train speed is reduced to 18 miles per hour. But look at what else is happening. Amperage is high, 725, as the engine strains to overcome increased train resistance. Excessive fuel is being burned. Draft forces are high, 229,000 pounds behind the 4th unit, and there are powerful in-train forces. On run 2, the engineer uses throttle modulation to control speed. At mileage 4.2, the story is much different. Speed is 27 miles per hour. The engineer has made a brake pipe reduction of 12 pounds. The throttle setting is 3. Amperage is low, 225. A reasonable amount of fuel is being burned. In-train forces are moderate, with 52,000 pounds of draft behind the 4th unit. On run 3, the engineer uses throttle modulation plus dynamic braking at mileage 4.2. There is a brake pipe reduction of 0 and a throttle setting of 0. The dynamic brakes generate a moderate 375 amps. Train speed is 25 miles per hour. In-train forces are moderate, 58,000 pounds of buff force behind the 4th unit. Let's compare results. Run 1 with power braking lasted 21.5 minutes over the 9 miles. Run 2 with throttle modulation took 22.2 minutes. Run 3 with dynamic braking took 22.3 minutes. But the real differences can be seen in the fuel consumption figures. Run 1 used 169.2 gallons of fuel, or 17.8 gallons per mile, for a GTM per gallon figure of 416.6. Run 2 used 72 gallons of fuel, or 7.57 gallons per mile, for a GTM per gallon figure of 978.1. Run 3 used 71.7 gallons at 7.54 gallons per mile, for a GTM per gallon figure of 982.6. Clearly, power braking is an outdated tool for fuel-efficient speed control. Another thing that every engineer should do is monitor locomotive performance. A unit that's not operating properly will waste fuel and create problems, no matter how well it's handled. Watch for white or black engine exhaust. Be alert for fluid leaks, both oil and water. Does the engine load and make transitions properly? Are the dynamic brakes working? Is there battery failure or other problems? Any one of these things means that the locomotive needs service. Report all problems on the Work Report Form 538D. In addition, engine problems encountered on the road should be promptly reported to the dispatcher and passed along to the equipment department as soon as possible. Fuel conservation is important to all of us. We've been extremely successful in this area. That's due primarily to the individual efforts of locomotive engineers right across the system. As we look ahead, fuel conservation becomes more important than ever. Conservation is everyone's responsibility and everyone's business. It's a team effort, and we all benefit.